Before Rome became an empire of marble, legions, and sprawling provinces, it was something far humbler, just a cluster of huts perched above the unpredictable Tiber River. This was a place where water shaped life far more than people shaped water. And from this simple, muddy beginning grew one of the quietest yet most profound engineering revolutions in human history. Imagine early Rome. There were no grand fountains or public baths. Instead, people relied on shallow wells dug by hand, scattered springs that trickled from the hillsides, and cisterns built to catch rainwater. Life was a constant negotiation with nature. The Romans watched the land with an almost spiritual attention, learning how water moved through the hills, how it seeped from rock formations, and how it vanished completely during the dry summer months. They were mapping the invisible, slowly realizing that their city's future depended not on conquest, but on mastering the hidden patterns of flow beneath their feet. As the city grew, the limitations of these natural water sources became impossible to ignore. The springs that once seemed so reliable would dry up too quickly. The wells struggled to keep up during the long, hot summers. The river was often polluted and unreliable. Rome's rising population was a constant, whispering warning. The city could not expand any further unless someone figured out how to bring a distant, reliable source of fresh water into its very heart. The Romans weren't starting from scratch. They were keen observers and brilliant adapters. They saw the advanced drainage systems of their neighbors, the Etruscans, and studied the primitive water channels built by the Greeks. Inspired, they began to experiment. They dug underground trenches, laid down fired clay pipes, and learned how to control gradients with astonishing precision. Their first monumental success wasn't for drinking water, but for drainage, the Cloaca Maxima. This massive sewer system was a masterclass in hydraulic engineering. It taught them a crucial lesson. Water could be guided, tamed, and made obedient if handled with patience and precision. From these early lessons, a revolutionary vision emerged. Instead of moving the city toward the water, Rome could move the water toward the city. This idea would change everything. In the year 312 BCE, this vision became a reality. The Aqua Appia, Rome's very first aqueduct, was constructed. But if you were living in Rome at the time, you probably wouldn't have seen much of it. It was built almost entirely underground, a silent, hidden vein of stone and gravity. It carried cool, clean spring water for miles, delivering it directly into the capital. And the most incredible part, it used no pumps, no complex machinery. It was powered by nothing more than careful surveying, simple wooden tools for measuring, and a gentle, consistent slope. It was a triumph of observation over force. When that clear, fresh water finally flowed steadily into Rome, the city felt reborn. Fountains, once a luxury, began to sparkle in public squares. The first public baths could finally be filled. Gardens were revived with a steady supply of water. For the first time, even the poorest citizens enjoyed free, easy access to this life-giving resource. It was a democratic miracle. Rome quickly understood that water was not merely a resource, it was power, it was stability, it was the very identity of a great city. And so, more aqueducts followed, each one bolder and more ambitious than the last. They began to rise from the ground, marching across valleys as elegant stone arcades. To the people of the ancient world, they must have looked like rivers lifted into the sky, a testament to Rome's growing confidence and its ability to command nature itself. Walking beneath their towering arches, you couldn't help but feel that you were part of a civilization that had mastered the world. The engineering inside these structures was just as impressive as their appearance. The water channels were lined with a special waterproof mortar called opus signinum, ensuring not a single drop was wasted. They built sedimentation basins along the route to filter out impurities, so the water arrived crystal clear. Maintenance shafts were placed at regular intervals, allowing engineers to inspect and repair the channels, ensuring centuries of clean flow. Outside, the aqueducts became beloved symbols of abundance. The quiet, whispering currents flowing through them became the background sound of the city, lulling a restless capital with a sense of eternal security and peace. This abundance of water fueled a cultural explosion. It encouraged the rise of the great Roman bathhouses, which were not just for hygiene but were social, political, and cultural centers. It supplied hundreds of public fountains, powered productive workshops, and watered shaded public gardens where citizens could escape the summer heat. This constant, reliable flow of water created a feeling that Rome could not be shaken. even when politics were unstable or war threatened its borders. These aqueducts, often built as gifts from powerful leaders seeking a lasting legacy, fundamentally shaped the Roman psyche. A steady flow of water meant a steady world. Today, if you travel through the Italian countryside, you'll see their remnants. The aqueducts are broken silhouettes stretching across green fields, silent, weathered, yet still majestic. They are beautiful, haunting reminders of a time when Roman engineers listened to the land with a sensitivity that our modern, technology-driven minds still struggle to fully comprehend. They stand as the last echoes of an era when humanity learned with extraordinary patience and respect how to guide the very lifeblood of nature. They moved water across mountains and valleys, creating the magical, breathtaking illusion that rivers could rise into the air, drift across the horizon, and walk gracefully through the sky. Long before the triumphal arches, before legionary sandals clattered across continents, before Rome crowned itself master of the known world, there was an invisible army. They were quiet thinkers, enslaved craftsmen, immigrant builders, anonymous mathematicians, and soft-spoken surveyors. Their names were never carved into marble, yet their minds became the hidden scaffolding of Roman greatness. They were the engineers of silence, and it was their genius that shaped the aqueducts, the roads, the domes, the bridges, and the very heartbeat of an empire that would call itself eternal. These were men who worked by moonlight because the Mediterranean day was too unforgiving. Men who knelt before rough stone blocks with calloused hands, whispering soft calculations under their breath. Despite being slaves, prisoners, or foreigners, they carried a kind of brilliance that no chain could restrain. Their world wasn't one of glory, but of measurement. The precise angle of a slope, the exact weight of a stone arch, the gentle curve of a channel allowing water to glide without turbulence. Many came from Greece, inheritors of Euclid's geometry. Others from Egypt, children of a land whose pyramids had already mastered celestial precision. Some from the Levant, where ancient engineers had redirected rivers for forgotten kingdoms. Rome absorbed them all, not with tenderness, but with a ruthless admiration for their skill, transforming these scattered traditions into a single, unified engineering language. Imagine their workshops, smelling of lime, mortar, and iron filings. Their mathematicians drew lines in the sand, calculating gradients so subtle that modern laser instruments are still humbled by their accuracy. Enslaved stonecutters carved blocks that fit together so tightly that grass couldn't grow between them. Their days began before sunrise, when the air was cool enough for thought, and ended long after the last torches flickered out. The surveyors, those quiet masters of the horizon, walked the hills with a simple tool called a groma wooden cross with dangling plumb lines. With it, they aligned roads that remained straight for miles and mapped aqueduct routes that followed invisible lines of gravity. Their elegance was such that water could travel dozens of miles without a single pump. Bridge builders would study a river's moods, its winter anger, its summer laziness, its shifting sediments and hidden whirlpools. Only then would they design arches whose curves carried both weight and history. It wasn't the emperors, but these silent men who understood the language of stone, who knew that compressive force could turn a humble keystone into a miracle of weightlessness. And beneath Rome's surface, in the cool darkness where footsteps echoed endlessly, other silent engineers maintained the vast sewage systems. These were the clocinae crawling through tunnels with only oil lamps to light their way. They cleared blockages, reinforced tunnels, and ensured the city above, oblivious to their toil, never drowned in its own waste. These were not men of prestige, but of endurance. Their contribution was measured by the absence of disaster. Even the grandest Roman monument, the Pantheon, owes its existence not just to the emperor who commissioned it, but to the unknown geniuses who concocted the recipe for Roman concrete. They mixed volcanic ash with lime and seawater, creating a material that seems to defy time itself. Their innovation allowed the world to witness a dome that floats like the heavens, a structure that whispers across centuries that someone, somewhere, in the dust of an uncelebrated workshop, solved a problem the world still struggles to reverse engineer. But Rome did not celebrate these minds. They lived in the margins of history, in the quiet footnotes of forgotten scrolls. Their lives were spent building a future for people who would never know their names. Many died young, from a collapsed scaffold or the slow poison of volcanic dust inhaled in quarries, yet their legacy expanded across continents. Aqueducts marching over valleys like rivers elevated to the sky, roads slicing across empires with unwavering purpose, harbors resisting the sea's eternal hunger, amphitheaters whose acoustics could carry a whisper from the stage to the farthest seat. In the silence of the night, when the city slept and fountains murmured with water guided from distant mountains, Rome forgot the masters of its infrastructure, but their work continued to breathe beneath the moonlight. For every stone arch holds within it the ghost of its maker's calculations. Every bridge whispers of the mind that predicted a river's temper. Every aqueduct carries not just water, but the memory of the hands that shaped its flow. Even today, when modern engineers examine these ruins, they feel a hush, a respectful quiet. It's as if the ancient builders are still present, still watching, still proud of the structures that survived empires, wars, earthquakes, and centuries of neglect. The true mystery of Roman engineering isn't in the monuments themselves, but in the minds behind them, minds never recorded, never immortalized, minds that belonged to men who stood at the edge of history and pushed, silently, so that an empire could rise. So, the next time you gaze at Rome's aqueduct arcs glowing in the soft Italian twilight, or trace the grooves of roads worn by centuries of footsteps, know that you are not merely seeing stone and mortar. Their quiet brilliance taught humanity what it meant to shape nature with respect, patience, and the deep unspoken, understanding that the greatest inventions are often born not from the quiet breath of dawn rising over the Sabine hills, to the gentle murmur of a Roman fountain glistening under evening torchlight. The story of a single aqueduct is the story of an entire civilization learning to listen to the land. If you trace its long stone path, step by step by step, slowly, as if walking through a dream, you begin to understand how Rome carried water not with force, but with the soft patience of a people who treated nature like a companion, not an enemy. It begins at a mountain spring, a place so silent and remote that the world feels paused. Here, cold water trickles from ancient rock and gathers in a small, clear pool, surrounded by moss and wind-polished stones. This is where Roman surveyors once knelt, dipping their hands in the water to taste its purity, measuring not with machines but with their eyes, instinct, and experience, deciding whether the spring was worthy of becoming a river reborn. From here, the aqueduct begins its invisible descent, following a gradient so gentle sometimes, only a few inches over a mile, that the water does not rush but glides, as though carried on the breath of the earth. It slips into a covered channel carved into the hillside, where it moves through darkness, cool and constant, the air inside smelling faintly of earth and lime mortar. Mile after mile, the aqueduct disappears beneath vineyards, olive groves, and quiet pastures where shepherds still walk today. Its presence is known only by the occasional inspection shaft poking through the soil like a stone chimney. These shafts allowed ancient caretakers to climb down with oil lamps to check for cracks, sediment, or roots that might disrupt the delicate journey of the water, because the aqueduct was not a single structure but a living system. Self-cleansing basins built at intervals let heavy particles settle out, siphons bridged dips in the landscape, and tunnels carried the channel under ridges too stubborn to carve. Eventually, the land's natural shape forces the aqueduct to emerge, rising from the earth as a long arcade of arches stretching across a valley. If you stand beneath these arches, you feel something at once humble and monumental, as if you were witnessing a river lifted onto the sky. Its flow is hidden inside a stone corridor lined with waterproof mortar made from volcanic ash. The stones, carved by hands lost to time, fit together with such precision that even now, centuries later, birds nest in the crevices and ivy drapes across them like curtains in an ancient theater. Walking alongside the aqueduct, you hear not rushing but murmuring, a soft, continuous whisper of water moving at the exact speed the Roman engineers intended. It's guided entirely by gravity, no pumps, no magic, only mathematics, patience, and limestone knowledge. Along its route, small forts once housed maintenance crews, men who lived their entire lives caring for the water's passage. They lit torches at night to inspect for leaks, cleared debris, and ensured that the city of Rome, far away and mostly unaware of their sacrifices, could wake each morning to fountains that never ran dry. Farther along, the aqueduct reaches a castellum divisorium, a distribution tank perched on a hill overlooking the city. Here, the water gathers in a quiet, circular chamber before flowing into lead or terracotta pipes. These funneled it toward baths, private homes, fountains, and irrigation fields. If you stand at the castellum today, even in ruins, you can imagine the water swirling calmly in its pool, waiting to be divided into 3 channels, one for the wealthy, one for the public fountains, and one for the baths and gardens. Each slot was carefully measured by stone apertures carved with mathematical precision, so the distribution remained fair and constant. From this point, the water slips into the city, weaving beneath cobblestone streets, under temples, under markets echoing with merchants' voices. Finally, it surfaces in a fountain, perhaps in the shadow of the Capitoline, or in a quiet courtyard where a marble basin catches the falling stream. Shimmering in the late afternoon sun, the water sparkles like liquid glass as it fills the basin and overflows into troughs where children, animals, and travelers pause to drink. As you watch this waterborne in a mountain spring many miles away flow so calmly, so gently, without noise or drama, you understand why Romans believed their aqueducts were a kind of miracle. They were proof that human hands could shape nature without wounding it. The aqueduct is not simply a feat of engineering but a meditation, a conversation with gravity, an agreement between humanity and landscape. Following its entire length, from spring to fountain, feels like walking beside a river that has chosen to take the long, scenic path home. A river that moves not with force but with wisdom. Even today, when the arches stand broken and ivy-wrapped, when the channels are dry and echoing with the footsteps of tourists, the aqueduct still hums with its old purpose. It still whispers the memory of water gliding over stone. It still invites anyone willing to walk its length to slow down, breathe deeply, and remember that some of the greatest creations in history were born not from power but from patience, not from conquest but from quiet understanding. Rome, an empire of noise and ambition, was sustained, in the end, by something as gentle and essential as a long stone path carrying water toward the waiting heart of a city. Before the aqueducts fell silent and ivy claimed their long stone spines, ancient Rome lived through an age of gentle abundance. The city seemed to float on the breath of its own fountains, a shimmering world where cool, constant water quietly shaped the rhythm of daily life. To walk through the Rome of that era was to wander through a living poem, fed by the clouds themselves. Before shopkeepers raised their shutters or senators donned their robes, women with clay pitchers walked toward neighborhood fountains. Water arched gracefully from bronze spouts shaped like lion heads or dolphins, each fountain a small miracle of the aqueduct system that carried mountain rain far across valleys without a single pump. The city woke not to alarm bells or horns, but to the slow gathering of neighbors around these fountains. In the wealthier districts, villas opened onto private courtyards where the first rays of the sun glinted off mosaics of sea gods. In the center of each garden, a small fountain bubbled calmly, scattering droplets over the petals of roses and laurel trees, cooling the marble floors. Here, aristocratic families ate breakfast beneath pergolas, the air softly cooled by water flowing through hidden channels in the walls. And beyond these homes stretched the famous Roman baths. These were vast complexes, less places to wash than to live, dream, and unwind. They were temples of quiet luxury, fed by aqueducts whose water arrived at precise temperatures thanks to ingenious underground systems. Citizens would enter these baths throughout the day, beginning in the frigidarium's cold pool that shocked the mind awake. Then, they would drift lazily into the tepid rheum, where warm vapor loosened the muscles, and finally sink into the caldarium, a room so warm and fragrant that time seemed to melt. Above them, domed ceilings caught the sound of dripping water and sent it spiraling through the chamber like a lullaby. For many Romans, these baths were sacred places where class divisions softened, where politics dissolved into steam. Strangers conversed about philosophy, farming, poetry, and the distant provinces that seemed to shimmer at the edge of the world. In the bustling markets, water pooled in stone troughs to cool fish, wash vegetables, and hydrate animals. Its continual presence lent a lightness to the atmosphere, even in the heat of summer. Artisans dipped brushes into bowls of clean water to soften pigments. Bakers moistened their dough. and innkeepers refilled jars for weary travelers. Children played in the runoff streams that trickled along the streets, building miniature dams or sticking their toes into the currents with delighted squeals. Farther from the center, along tree-lined avenues leading toward the city gates, the gentle hiss of irrigation channels fed vineyards, orchards, and kitchen gardens. Each villa, regardless of wealth, relied on this subtle miracle. Water arrived from distant mountains with such steady consistency that olive groves thrived, fifth trees blossomed, and grapevines grew plump and fragrant. Walking the garden paths of these estates, one heard constant water sounds, tiny channels trickling along mosaic borders, shallow pools reflecting cypress trees and statues, stone basins where gardeners rinsed tools while murmuring to themselves. Near the edge of the city lay public parks, where shaded walkways ran beside man-made streams that mimicked natural brooks. Here, elderly men played dice while reclining on benches. Mothers lulled their infants to sleep, and philosophers strolled in circles, speaking softly about the nature of life, motion, and time. All around them, Rome breathed through water. Its aqueducts stretched across the outer hills like long, patient guardians, carrying the memory of mountain rain into the heart of the empire. Even the air of the city felt different, cooler, fresher, gently washed each day by the constant evaporation from fountains and baths. On hot afternoons, the breeze carried a faint chill from the cisterns hidden deep beneath the ground. At sunset, when the last orange light touched the stone arches of the aqueducts, the city glowed. Fountains caught the fading light and turned it into trembling shards of gold. Children returned home with wet sandals, and bathhouses emptied as relaxed citizens strolled into the open squares, smelling faintly of oils and herbs. At dinner tables, people praised the abundance of water as a divine blessing, though few truly understood the complex, silent network of tunnels, pipes, and arches that made this life possible. After nightfall, when lamps flickered in narrow alleys and stars shimmered above the forum, Rome settled into a tranquil hush. It was broken only by the ever-present sound of water, soft splashes from courtyard fountains, the distant murmur of the Tiber River, the quiet gurgle of pipes beneath the streets. These sounds were so constant and soothing that citizens fell asleep, believing they lived in a world where water would flow forever, where the aqueducts would never falter, where the city's heartbeat would pulse gently through its fountains for all eternity. It was a time when Rome felt invincible, not because of its armies, but because of the serene abundance that fed every bath, every garden, every workshop, and every villa. A time when the empire's greatest luxury was not gold or silk, but the peaceful certainty that with each new dawn the fountains would still be singing, the baths still steaming, and the aqueducts, those quiet rivers raised into the skyward, still be carrying clouds down from the mountains to nourish a city that believed itself. There was no single morning when Rome awoke to find its aqueducts dry. No sudden disaster cracked the arches or silenced the fountains. Instead, the end of Rome's water miracle came like a long, slow exhale, a fading of breath so gentle that centuries passed before anyone fully understood that the empire had lost something irreplaceable. To trace that decline step by step, stone by stones, to walk alongside a civilization growing tired, older, and quietly overwhelmed by forces it once believed it could command forever. In the beginning, the water still flowed, though slightly less boldly than before. Its once crystalline voice was softened by sediment and neglect. The channels grew rough and uneven as lime deposits thickened along their walls, shrinking the paths through which water once glided so effortlessly. While the city bustled above, unaware of the slow shift beneath their feet, cracks began to appear in maintenance schedules. The crew houses along the aqueduct routes became less populated as funds, once dedicated to repair, were redirected. Emergency armies, border defenses, and political bribes seemed more urgent to rulers fearful of invasion. The empire's heart was no longer nourished by the patient labor of silent engineers, but strained by the constant demands of war and instability. As Rome's borders stretched too thin, the steady discipline that once allowed water to move hundreds of miles with perfect precision dissolved into fragmented priorities. Governors came and went, taxes fluctuated wildly, and local officials argued over who was responsible for repairing what section of which aqueduct. Still, the water trickled on, because the bones of Roman engineering were incredibly resilient. But resilience has its limits. By the 3rd century, the aqueducts found themselves increasingly caught in the crossfire of a world turning violent. Invading armies discovered that breaking the arches of a single aqueduct could paralyze an entire city. So, stone pillars that once seemed eternal now became tactical targets. Gothic and Vandal raiders toppled sections of arches, not because they hated Rome's fountains, but because they understood that a thirsty city becomes a vulnerable city. Each breach in the aqueduct line sent shockwaves through Roman life. Baths closed temporarily, gardens wilted, fountains sputtered, and ordinary citizens were left wondering how a world so abundant could feel suddenly so fragile. In rural areas, farmers began diverting water illegally from the channels to irrigate failing fields as climate patterns shifted and harvests grew unpredictable. This forced the state into a losing battle of sealing unauthorized openings while ignoring the widening cracks of larger structural decline. Slowly, Rome's most essential miracle, its ability to bring mountain rain into the heart of the empire, became a patchwork system held together by desperate repairs, hastily forged iron clamps, and prayers. Droughts in some years, heavy storms in others, caused erosion around piers that had stood for centuries. The once smooth gradients of the aqueducts sagged ever so slightly, slowing the flow further, causing pockets of stagnant water that bred algae and weakened mortar. Still, the water flowed, but it was no longer the bright, confident river carried through the sky. It was a tired river, hesitant, burdened by the empire's anxieties. Meanwhile, inside the city, the famed Roman baths, those shimmering temples of leisure, began shortening their hours, heating fewer pools and letting decorative fountains fall silent to conserve what water remained. The laughter and crowds that once echoed beneath vaulted ceilings grew thinner, softer, replaced by the uneasy murmur of citizens who could feel luxury slipping away like sand through open fingers. Wealthy households dug private wells, abandoning public fountains to the poor, which only exacerbated social divides. The once universal gift of water became a symbol of inequality, a quiet wound in Rome's identity. In the countryside, aqueduct watchmen, unpaid for months, abandoned their posts. This left the channels unguarded, vulnerable not only to invaders but to simple collapse from a lack of cleaning or reinforcement. Vegetation crept slowly into the stone's first moss, then roots, then entire shrubs whose fingers pried apart mortar joints with patient persistence. Storms washed soil into open conduits, animals fell into shafts and clogged tunnels, and each unattended problem compounded over time, like dust settling in an empty house. Then came the moment historians often cite as symbolic. In 537 CE, during the Byzantine Gothic Wars, King Vitiges cut the aqueducts feeding Rome, hoping to force the city into surrender. This deliberate severing, though later repaired in some areas, marked a psychological turning point. It proved to Romans and their enemies alike that the ancient system was mortal, that even the stone veins carrying the lifeblood of the empire could be choked. After that, even restored sections felt more fragile, less divine. When the city's population plummeted due to war, famine, and plague, many aqueducts were simply abandoned because there were no longer enough people to justify the cost of their maintenance. Entire baths closed permanently, their marble halls echoing with wind instead of water, their once warm floors cold beneath drifting leaves. Fountains dried up, becoming quiet basins where dust collected, and weeds sprouted where droplets once fell like silver threads. The sound of Rome changed. Where water once sang through every neighborhood, silence now spread, soft but heavy. A reminder that even the greatest civilizations can lose their heartbeat, not through sudden catastrophe, but through gradual fatigue. Centuries later, when medieval travelers wrote about Rome, they described a city pierced with the skeletons of stone canals, towering arches that carried nothing but ivy and memories. Aqueducts that once fed 1 million people now stood like the ribs of a giant creature long dead, its bones bleaching in the sun. But even then, in their brokenness, the aqueducts retained a quiet dignity, as if they understood they had fulfilled their purpose, and now sat watching the land they once united, accepting their transformation from lifelines to ruins. And yet, in the midst of decline, there were moments of beauty, moonlight flowing through empty arcades, rainwater trickling through abandoned channels, travelers pausing in their shadow to rest, listen, and wonder how a world once so vibrant could fall so gently into silence. The day the water truly stopped was not a day at all, but an age, a slow dimming of light, a gradual surrender to time, war, and neglect, a soft unraveling of a miracle that had endured for nearly a millennium. As we look at the remains today, arches standing against the sky, channels carved with ancient tool marks, moss shimmering like memory, we feel not tragedy, but a deep, reflective calm. Because the aqueducts remind us that even the most extraordinary achievements fade not with thunder but with a whisper, not with collapse but with quiet yielding. The story of their decline, like the story of Rome itself, is not a tale of destruction, but of transformation, the gentle end of an age when water, guided by the hands of forgotten engineers, once walked through the sky. If you walk the old Roman countryside with a quiet mind and a patient step, moving slowly through fields brushed with silver morning mist, you begin to see them. They're like long ghost lines stretching across Italy, France, and Spain, the broken ribs of forgotten aqueducts rising from the earth. Following them becomes less a journey across geography than a drifting through time itself, as if each arch were a doorway and each fallen stone a whisper. It's an echo from an age when water flowed effortlessly above valleys and hills, guided by the gentle precision of ancient engineers whose names have long dissolved into dust. In Italy, just outside the soft glow of Rome's outskirts, the aqueduct park unfurls like a dreamscape. Here, archers stand in a miles-long procession across fields of wild grass, their silhouettes shifting with the light of dawn. The modern city fades into a faint hum, while the aqueduct's immense, empty corridors seem to breathe, filled no longer with water but with centuries of silence. The stones are warm under the morning sun, their surfaces scarred by wind and time, and ivy drapes across them like ancient veils. Yet something about their posture, leaning but unbroken, weary but dignified, makes them feel alive. It's as though if you closed your eyes, you might still hear the distant echo of water running through the hidden channel above your head. Walking further into the countryside, you reach places where the arches suddenly end, broken off mid-stride like an unfinished sentence. These interruptions, these absences, speak as loudly as the surviving spans. They remind you that every structure, no matter how monumental, is vulnerable to time's soft erosion. From Italy, the ghost lines continue into France, where the great Pont du Gard rises in honey-colored stone above the Garden River. Its triple tiers of arches hold the coast sky with such impossible grace that you feel as if you've stumbled upon a relic from a time when God still walked among humans. The river below reflects its towering geometry, turning it into a vision of gold floating on blue, so serene and symmetrical that even the slightest ripple feels like a disturbance to something sacred. To stand at the base of Pont du Gard is to feel your heartbeat slow, your breath deepen, as if the ancient builders left not merely stone, but a kind of meditative stillness embedded in the structure as perfect alignment. Travelers throughout history have stopped here not just to admire grandeur, but to rest beneath its shadow, listening to the wind move through the arches like a flute. You can hear the soft flap of bird wings, sensing the invisible memory of water that once glided through the uppermost channel. It was a narrow passage, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, yet at once pulsed with the lifeblood of the city of Crossing into Spain, the aqueduct of Segovia emerges from the heart of the city like an apparition. It's a vast colonnade of granite blocks, assembled without any mortar, standing with such unwavering balance that it seems more like a geological formation than a man-made structure. The plaza beneath it hums softly with life cafes opening, cups clinking, footsteps echoing across cobblestones. Yet the aqueduct remains still, timeless, unaffected by the centuries of human noise at its feet. Its arches soar above the rooftops, marching toward the distant hills where the water once began its journey. When sunlight strikes the stone just right, the aqueduct seems almost translucent, as though carved from morning light itself. Walking alongside it, you feel a quiet companionship, as if each arch invites you not merely to observe, but to wander with it. You start to imagine the water moving across the landscape in long, shimmering threads, bringing life to gardens, baths, fountains, and homes long vanished. And across the Iberian countryside, smaller fragments appear unexpectedly, a single arch standing alone in a wheat field, a half-collapsed channel hidden in a ravine, a mossy pillar leaning gently as though bowing to the centuries. Each fragment carries a soft melancholy, not of tragedy but of peaceful endurance. These ruins don't mourn their brokenness, they wear it like a natural evolution, a graceful yielding to time's embrace. As you journey through these landscapes, the ghost lines guide you like constellations laid upon the earth. They trace paths of civilizations that understood water, perhaps better than we do today. Civilizations that built not with haste, but with contemplation, aligning stone to gravity, rhythm, and the gentle intelligence of flow. The more you walk, the more you sense that these aqueducts were not merely constructions, they were conversations between humanity and the landscape, expressions of trust in the land's patience and in water's loyalty. At twilight, when the hills of Italy glow with amber light, when the Pont du Gard blushes under the setting sun, when Segovia's arches cast elongated shadows across the city square, the aqueducts feel almost animate. It's as if they're re-waking for a brief moment to acknowledge the day's end, their stones turning warmer, their outlines softening into silhouettes that echo across the countryside like long, ancient signatures. And when night finally settles, wrapping the hills in a soft indigo haze, the aqueducts become more ghostly, still dark lines against the horizon. Their once busy channels now filled with moonlight and memories. Standing there beneath a sky pricked with stars, you understand why poets and travelers across centuries have felt compelled to write about these ruins, why artists painted them as gateways between worlds, why philosophers compared them to the spine of a sleeping titan. It's because the aqueducts hold inside them the memory of water. And water is life, continuity, breath. Even without water, the aqueducts still seem to breathe, holding the rhythm of flow in their very geometry. They whisper not with sound but with presence, telling stories of distant springs, of engineers kneeling in cold mountain streams, of surveyors walking for miles with their simple tools. They tell stories of citizens gathering at fountains, of empires rising and falling while the arches remained patiently aligned with gravity. Following these ghost lines across Italy, France, and Spain is to follow the last faint pulse of Rome's ancient heart. It's a pulse that beats not in marble forums or abandoned amphitheaters, but in the long, quiet shadows of aqueducts that once carried clouds down from the mountains to nourish cities that believed themselves eternal. And though the water has stopped, the memory has not. The arches still stand, whispering to the wind, to travelers, to the earth itself. They remind us that even when a river dries, the path it carved remains a ghost line written across the hills to guide anyone willing to slow down, walk gently, and listen. If you kneel in a quiet field, anywhere in the old Roman countryside, where the grass bends gently in the wind and the sun warms the back of your neck, it's impossible to guess that just beneath your feet, hidden from sight and memory, lie the ancient veins of a world that once pulsed with flowing water. We're talking about hundreds of miles of subterranean channels, stone tunnels, vaulted passages, and forgotten maintenance shafts, all carved by patient hands 2,000 years ago. This was a dark, intricate labyrinth that sustained an empire without ever asking for attention. To descend into these buried corridors, even just in our imagination, is to slip away from the noise of the modern world. It's a journey into a realm of cool air, echoing footsteps, and the lingering scent of damp stone. A realm where the faintest drip of water sounds like a heartbeat, and where time moves not by minutes, but by centuries. Our journey begins at a small, unmarked opening, half hidden by tall grass. Perhaps it's an abandoned puteus, a vertical maintenance shaft once used by Roman workers to inspect the aqueduct below. As you lower yourself into the darkness, holding on to rough stone edges worn smooth by ancient hands, the light narrows above you until it becomes just a bright circle framed by earth and sky. When your feet finally touch the channel floor, the world above feels impossibly distant, replaced by a deep, quiet stillness that seems to hum in your bones. The tunnel stretches ahead, narrow, cool, and dim, its walls are lined with opus signinum, that reddish, waterproof mortar of crushed tiles and lime that once kept precious water from leaking into the soil. And though centuries of sediment now cling to the surface, the craftsmanship is still visible, each stroke of ancient tools preserved like a signature hidden in the shadows. Walking forward, you notice the ceiling arching low, curved with mathematical precision so the channel can bear the weight of the earth above. The temperature drops with each step, a stark reminder that these tunnels were built not for human comfort, but for the quiet, constant passage of water, a river contained within stone. Along the walls, small niches appear. These were inspection alcoves, where workers once crouched with oil lamps, checking for blockages, scraping away mineral deposits, and listening for changes in the water's voice. Because to the Romans, Water didn't simply flow, it spoke, and its murmur revealed the health of the entire system. Imagine the responsibility, the intimacy of that relationship, knowing the life of a city depended on your ability to interpret these whispers in the dark. Occasionally, the tunnel widens into a settling basin. Here, impurities once drifted to the bottom before the water continued its long journey toward the city. Standing in such a chamber, you can almost hear the low ripple of the past, the soft swirling of water that has not touched these stones for over 1,000 years. It's a phantom sound, a memory held by the very air in the chamber. Further ahead, the tunnel might fork into a series of branching corridors. Some lead to collapsed sections, long ago swallowed by soil, their stories ending abruptly. Others might open into vast, vaulted chambers built beneath hills just to maintain the aqueduct's precise, gentle slope. In these spaces, the echo of your own breathing multiplies into soft, ghost-like harmonies that fade slowly back into the darkness. It's an almost sacred quiet, a cathedral built not for gods, but for water. Shafts rise overhead like stone chimneys, their sides etched with ancient ladder marks, where workers once climbed toward daylight, carrying tools, lamps, and buckets of debris. Think about that climb, from the cool, silent dark into the bright, noisy Roman world above. Some of these shafts are now clogged with roots that snake down from the modern world, weaving through the tunnel like nature reclaiming borrowed ground. Others remain open, letting down a faint column of sunlight filled with drifting dust motes that look like tiny stars suspended in time. It's a beautiful, poignant sight, a bridge between two worlds, two millennia, all captured in a single beam of light. As you move deeper, the tunnel occasionally narrows to a crawl space, forcing you to stoop, just like the ancient engineers who built it. They constructed this, inch, by hand, cutting through bedrock with iron picks, chiseling the walls smooth, and aligning every single foot of the channel to maintain that perfect, almost imperceptible slope. It was so gentle it couldn't be perceived by the naked eye, yet so precise it allowed water to glide effortlessly across miles and miles. This wasn't brute force. It was a symphony of engineering, a testament to human ingenuity and tireless dedication. Sometimes the passage suddenly opens into a cavernous space, a massive underground reservoir where water once pooled in silence, cooling the air and casting shimmering reflections on the walls. It would have been a subterranean lake that fed the baths, fountains, and gardens of Rome. Now, these chambers are dry, their floors cracked, but the echoes remain, holding the memory of water like a lullaby trapped in stone. Along the way, you might encounter carved symbols, cryptic marks left by the workers. Perhaps they were recording repairs, directions, measurements, or even warnings. Though we can't read most of them today, they feel like quiet fingerprints of lives long gone. They're evidence that these tunnels were once alive with the soft murmur of human activity, of men working in torchlight, sweating in dim chambers, whispering instructions to one another as they cared for the lifeline of a city that probably never paused to wonder how its magnificent fountains kept flowing. In some of the deeper sections, the aqueduct passes beneath hills through long rock-cut galleries. Their floors are polished smooth by centuries of flowing water, and their ceilings are dotted with fractures where roots sneak downward, still searching for moisture. Walking here, your footsteps create a rhythmic, hollow beat that echoes gently back to you, making you feel as though you are not alone, but accompanied by the memory of every person who has ever walked this path. At the deepest point of the system, where sunlight is never reached, the stillness becomes profound, almost otherworldly. Your own breathing seems to merge with the darkness, as if these tunnels, silent for a millennium, are listening to you. Then, gradually, you start to notice signs of ascent. The air warms slightly, the roof rises, and the tunnel curves gently toward a place where stone is destined to meet daylight again. Climbing up through a final access shaft, you emerge once more into the open world. You blink as sunlight reflects off the grass, the warmth of the earth replacing the subterranean coolness. Looking back at the unmarked patch of ground you just climbed from, it's impossible to imagine the immense network hidden below. It's a hidden universe of tunnels, basins, chambers, and shafts that once breathed life into Rome but now sleep beneath fields, forests, vineyards, and villages, completely unseen by the people who walk above them every day. Yet, if you lie down in the grass, close your eyes, and listen very closely, you might feel a faint sense of presence. It's not a sound, exactly, but a soft impression of flow, as though the memory of water still drifts through the empty channels, whispering stories of a time when these tunnels carried rivers, fed an empire, and echoed with the footsteps of the caretakers who served the most essential, invisible miracle of Roman civilization. And in that moment, with the sky wide above and the dark aqueduct world hidden below, you understand that the true power of Rome was not just in its legions or its marble monuments, but in these quiet, buried corridors, these veins of stone, still resting just beneath the grass, holding the memory of water that once shaped an empire. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the hidden world beneath. If you wander along the broken lines of Rome's forgotten aqueducts in the early hush of dawn, when the air is cool and the hills glow with a faint lavender haze, you begin to sense something truly magical. These ruins, these towering arches and half-buried channels, they don't just hold the memory of water. They hold the echo of voices, centuries of myths and murmured tales carried by shepherds, peasants, pilgrims, and travelers who lived long after the aqueducts fell silent. And as you walk beneath their immense shadows, you can almost feel the stories rising like mists from the stones themselves, drifting into your imagination with the soft persistence of ancient breath. The very first myths came from the medieval peasants who tended their flocks in the shadows of these crumbling arches. These were men and women who believed that the abandoned channels were haunted by the spirits of the engineers who died building them. They described ghostly figures appearing at twilight, carrying phantom tools and lanterns that glowed like distant embers. Their footsteps were said to echo softly, as if they were eternally repairing what time had already claimed. Some people claimed they actually saw these spectral workers, kneeling by broken piers, tapping stones with phantom chisels, and whispering calculations into the wind. And while the peasants feared them, they also respected them. They believed these ghosts were maintaining the ruins, keeping them from collapsing entirely and crushing some unsuspecting traveler. Then there were the stories of Aqua Appia, the dead water. This was a mythic stream said to still move through the dry channels at night. It was invisible to the eye, but audible to those who walked alone. People described a faint, rhythmic murmur, like water rolling over distant stones, as though the aqueducts themselves had remembered their purpose and summoned a phantom flow just to comfort their own old bones. Travelers in the Middle Ages wrote about hearing this strange sound. Sometimes it was a soft gasp, other times a whispering rush. But whenever they leaned down to listen more closely, the channel was always dry and cold, just a hollow stone throat open to the night sky. In rural villages across Italy, France, and Spain, mothers would warn their children never to wander too close to the ruins after sunset. They told tales of La Donna dell'Acqua, the Lady of the Water. She was a spectral woman said to walk along the arches, forever searching for the last drop of water that was lost when the aqueducts broke. She was described as being sorrowful rather than evil, but her presence was said to chill the air. Those who claimed to have encountered her said she glided rather than walked, her robes trailing behind her like rippling water. Her voice was a soft, distant hum, as if she was calling for something she once cherished but could no longer find. Other legends were a bit more whimsical. They spoke of echo spirits, tiny beings born from the last sighs of water as it drained from the aqueducts. These were mischievous little creatures who would mimic footsteps, laughter, or whispered phrases just to confuse travelers. They were seen as harmless guardians of the ruins, filling the lonely stretches of countryside with strange but gentle sounds. It was a comforting thought, wasn't it, that you were never truly alone out there. Medieval monks even recorded stories from travelers who rested beneath the arches during storms. They described how the wind, funneling between the stone ribs of the aqueduct, created this harmonic moan. It was so haunting that it felt like chanting from another world, a choir of unseen voices resonating with the very architecture of the past. Some monks insisted these harmonies were not just the wind. They believed they were the remnants of prayers whispered by Roman workers who labored in darkness, hoping their incredible creations would last long after their own lives had ended. Over in the French countryside, near the magnificent Pont du Gard, villagers told stories of the silver goat. This was a mythical animal said to appear on moonlit nights, leaping gracefully atop the arches as if it were walking along a celestial path. Its hooves were said to spark tiny flashes of light against the stone. Legend had it that if you followed the goat, it would lead you to hidden treasure buried by the Roman engineers. Of course, no one ever claimed to actually find it, but maybe that's because the treasure wasn't gold. but the quiet, breathtaking beauty you find when walking through the ruins at night. Travelers passing through Spain during the medieval period wrote about hearing something different along the aqueduct of Segovia. They described a soft, melodic tapping, like raindrops falling in perfect rhythm, even when the sky was perfectly clear. The locals had a name for it, the aqueduct keeper. This was an invisible guardian who had tended the flow of water for centuries and simply refused to abandon his post, even after the channel had run dry. He was said to tap the stones each night to ensure they still stood strong, fulfilling an oath he had made to the ancient engineers who built it. Some stories were a bit darker, though still strangely gentle. In the hills outside Rome, farmers spoke of a creature called the Thirsting Man. He was a lone ghost said to wander the dry channels, searching endlessly for water, but not to drink it. He was searching to listen to it, the way a musician might seek a lost melody. Those who encountered him described him as tall and silent, with hollow eyes that reflected the moonlight as though they were filled with distant rivers. He never harmed anyone. He would simply pause, watch, and then vanish, leaving behind only a faint sound like dripping water. In the more remote stretches, where the aqueduct arches stand half swallowed by earth and vegetation, the legends grew even more intertwined with nature. It was believed that the roots of the ivy creeping over the stones carried memories of the water that once flowed above them. They said if you pressed your ear to an ivy-covered pier, you might hear a faint heartbeat or a slow pulse, as if the vines themselves had become the new vessels for that ancient flow. Wandering minstrels would also tell tales of aqueducts that would awaken on the solstice, glowing faintly with blue light as phantom water surged through the channels, illuminating the entire valley for just a brief, glorious moment before fading back into ruin. Even in the medieval courts, poets recited stories of lovers who carved secret messages into the aqueduct stones. They believed that as long as the water flowed, their love would remain alive. And so, when the aqueducts dried up, their spirits were said to linger beneath the arches, whispering their eternal vows to anyone who passed by. Even scholars from later centuries couldn't resist adding to the mythology. They described how the aqueduct ruins seemed to change with the seasons. They would moan in the winter winds, hum softly during the summer heat, and sing lightly during autumn rains. It was as if the stones still remembered the music of moving water and were trying, in their own quiet way, to replicate it. And through all of these myths, whether they are whimsical, melancholic, or mysterious, one single theme echoes again and again: the belief that the aqueducts were not dead structures. They were sleeping giants, guardians of a forgotten age, who would awaken if water ever returned. And when you walk along these ruins today, beneath skies that shift from gold to violet, among grasses that brush your ankles and stones warm from the sun, you can feel why these stories took root. It's because the aqueducts, even in their ruin, draw your imagination into their quiet depths. Their long shadows carry the weight of history, their arches curving like the ribs of ancient beasts who once drank from rivers of sky. And though they no longer carry water, they still carry whispers, legends, and soft echoes that drift through the countryside like ghost currents. They remind anyone who pauses to listen that memory is its own kind of river, flowing endlessly through the landscapes. The springs of the Annual Valley feed modern fountains through systems that have been upgraded, but never fully replaced. If you pause at a Nasoni, one of the city's iconic Castilian drinking fountains, the cool water that flows endlessly, free for everyone, is a direct descendant of that aqueduct tradition. It's a living thread of continuity that would probably astonish the original builders, yet somehow, it feels completely natural here in Rome. Step into a quiet courtyard or an old residential street, and you might find a curious curved wall, or a chunk of travertine with small square holes, or maybe a raised ridge running beneath apartment buildings. These are architectural fossils of the ancient conduits, integrated seamlessly into modern structures. You see, the great engineers of the Renaissance and the Baroque didn't destroy the aqueduct skeletons. They reused them, grafting new pipes onto old roots, wrapping new fountains around ancient outlets, and letting the city grow like a living organism around its old bones. Walk near the Trevi fountain in the early morning, before the crowds awaken. You can hear the gentle murmur of the Aqua Virgo. An aqueduct built all the way back in 19 BC, it is still delivering water, still performing its quiet miracle every single day. It's the only ancient aqueduct that has been functioning continuously since the age of Emperor Augustus. Its water, cool and impossibly clear, flows through narrow passages beneath the bustle of modern Rome, emerging into the marble basin of the Trevi like a memory breaking the surface of time. Locals hardly think about it. They drink, splash, toss their coins, and walk away. But the water beneath their feet is older than a lot of languages, older than the churches, older even than many of the city walls. You'll find olive trees, community gardens, and small rural houses whose fields are watered by ancient underground channels, now used for irrigation. In some neighborhoods, modern pipes run directly parallel to collapsed Roman ones, almost as if in silent respect. In this city, every era collaborates, and the aqueducts serve as a kind of neutral ground, a timeless hinge between the past and the present. Visit the baths of Caracalla at sunset. You can almost hear the ancient water roaring through the hidden pipes that lie beneath your feet, feeding pools that were once big enough to hold thousands of people. And though the water is long gone, modern Rome uses these vast empty halls for summer operas and concerts. The echoes of violins have replaced the echoes of running water, transforming the ruins not into relics, but into instruments of memory. Even in the Vatican gardens, whispers of ancient channels remain. You can see them in restored fountains and forgotten cisterns, some still supplied by the Aqua Traiana. This aqueduct was partially revived in the Renaissance and still carries water into the heart of modern Rome, proving that even the papacy bows quietly to the genius of the original aqueduct builders. Modern architects, too, draw inspiration from those arches, curving their bridges, walkways, and facades in gentle homage to that ancient rhythm of spans and piers. In the late afternoon, as the golden light begins to lean westward, the aqueducts cast long, warm shadows across bike paths, apartment buildings, and grassy fields, connecting centuries in a single stretch of stone. And when nighttime arrives, the ruins settle into a serene stillness. Couples stroll beneath them, the moon illuminates their curves, and streetlights glow softly in the distance. The city breathes quietly, like a vast living entity whose veins still remember how water once moved through them. Even in the constant hum of modern Rome scooters whining, buses sighing, conversations drifting through open windows, you can sense an undercurrent of peace surrounding the aqueducts. It's as if these ancient water roads lend the city a memory of calm, reminding it to slow down, to breathe, to exist in layers rather than just moments. And if you close your eyes, standing beside one of these great arches, letting the stone cool your hand, you might just imagine the sound of water returning, not in a great rush but in a soft, continuous murmur, a ghost flow passing gently through channels that still crave a purpose, still eager to serve, as if waiting patiently for the day Rome asks them to carry water again. Because the aqueducts are not abandoned monuments, they are quiet elders, respected by the city, tended by preservationists, rediscovered by hikers and archaeologists, loved by photographers, and embraced by daily life. They are woven gently into the landscape of parks, roads, farms, and homes. If you walk the full length of a Roman aqueduct, you start to feel the soft, unbroken thread linking Rome's past to its present. Your journey begins at a quiet mountain spring, where cold water first trembles into motion. You pass through meadows where sheep graze under the morning light, across great arches that stride over valleys, and finally into the faded heart of the old empire. As you trace this path, your feet brushing against grasses that once felt the shadows of legionaries, you realize something extraordinary. Some aqueducts are still alive. They still carry water with the calm confidence of an elder who refuses to abandon their duty. Others, though, lie silent. They're collapsed or buried so deep beneath earth and memory that only the faintest hum of their former purpose lingers. The living aqueducts flow quietly, almost shyly, refusing to boast despite their incredible endurance. Take the Aqua Virgo. It still winds beneath the city like a hidden artery. Its cool breath rises into modern fountains as if it has never aged, delivering water to the Trevi with a tenderness that feels almost human. Then there's the Aqua Marcia. Its springs still feed the higher reservoirs, slipping through updated channels that shadow the old Roman lines. It's a bond so seamless that even Rome's engineers speak of the ancient roots with reverence, knowing that modern pipes merely borrow the wisdom of the originals. But then there are the dead aqueducts. Their arches crumble into the earth, their ribs broken, their channels filled with dust. Their voices are muted, except for the sigh of wind slipping through ancient cracks. These ruins, scattered like giant fossils across the Italian countryside, carry a different kind of quiet. It's a heavier silence that feels not like failure, but like rest. It's as though the aqueducts, after centuries of service, simply laid down their burdens and allowed the hills to reclaim them. Wander beneath the ruins of the Aqua Claudia or the shattered stones of the Anno Novus, and you feel that these structures aren't truly dead, but dreaming. They're suspended between existence and memory. Their shadows linger across fields in long, soft strokes that shift with the seasons. Their broken piers rise like solemn monuments to an engineering faith so deep it could outlast earthquakes, wars, and time itself. The mystery isn't why some survive and some fall, but why both states feel equally eternal. It's as though the aqueducts have found two different paths to immortality, one through water and one through silence. The ones still flowing are like rivers of continuity, whispering ancient clarity into modern life. The dead ones are quiet teachers, offering lessons in patience, resilience, and the beauty of surrender. And as you wander from one to the other, from arches that stand proud against the sunlight to channels so faded they resemble scars on the land, the question grows softer, more profound. How do these structures, half living, half ghost, continue to hold Rome together? The answer seems to lie in the gentle way the city accepts both conditions. It treats the living aqueducts as part of its bloodstream, and the dead ones as part of its soul. In parks where children play beneath ruined arches, in gardens fed by hidden springs, in quiet courtyards where a fragment of ancient conduit supports a modern balcony, the city reveals itself as a living map of water and stone, held aloft by memories that refuse to dry. Even the dead aqueducts contribute to life. They provide shade, habitat, beauty, and inspiration. They're a soft reminder that all things, even great empires, move through cycles of rising and falling, flowing and fading. At night, when Rome settles into its slow breath and the stones cool, you can almost imagine the aqueducts whispering to each other across the hills. The living ones murmur gently with their water. The dead ones hum through their hollow ribs. Their voices weave together into a single quiet chorus that reminds us why their mystery endures. It's because they are neither fully alive nor fully gone. They move between states, the way water moves between clouds and rivers and the sea. They hold the memory of an empire without demanding its return. They remain, in their quiet persistence, symbols of something that no conquest or collapse can extinguish. And when you finally reach the end of your walk, standing in the twilight as the arches fade into blue shadows, you understand why the story of the aqueducts has no final chapter. As long as springs flow, as long as stones endure, as long as people walk beneath their silhouettes and listen for echoes of an ancient current, Rome's water roads will continue to exist in the in-between, half in the world of the living, half in the world of the remembered. They glow softly with the eternal mystery of where the water still flows and where it chooses to sleep. Thanks for joining us on this journey. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives into the hidden histories that shape our world.